Hello, hello. Come on, by now you guys know you can say hi. There we go, thank you. Hello to all of you, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. This morning at the term sheet breakfast, I asked the room, how many people here still have a lot of big questions about how AI is going to play out? And actually, who here has, let's ask the room. How many people here have big questions about how AI is going to play out? Excellent. Hopefully we're going to help directionally come up with some answers here. Does that sound like a plan?
Let's try.
Let's try, we're going to do it. So to that being the case, let's start with the hardest thing. What is the trickiest thing about investing in AI right now? Leigh Marie, you're right next to me, so start us off.
I think it's becoming very clear over the past 2 years since ChatGPT came out that there is a massive opportunity to build companies in AI. Even if the models weren't going to improve, they definitely will. We should, probably just discuss that. But even if they weren't going to improve, there's just so many ways that both enterprises and consumers are getting value out of this tech today. Whether it's a coding assistant, whether it's some sort of customer support chatbot, we're already seeing a lot of these things in the enterprise. So a really challenging part of my job and a high stakes part of my job is figuring out who are the winners, especially in these certain application areas where we know a lot of value is going to accrue.
Sarah.
I'm a super visual person, and so I always have these two kind of scary images in my mind. One is, there's an idiom, picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. And so you have this amazing set of capabilities, and one thing we think about all the time is how do we make sure we take the most advantage of such capabilities and also not do something that is better fulfilled by a general player, a foundation model player. And so making sure that we are at the right point of the frontier is something that we struggle a lot with.
I think what we all know is that the opportunity is massive, the pace is extraordinary, there's so much in front of us, but to your first point, I think there are fundamental questions that we don't know the answer to right now and whose answers are indicative of the opportunity. One is probably the rate of advancement, how fast things are going to move, and can we assume that the rate we're on is indicative of the rate we will be on. The other is probably what this ecosystem looks like. Is it closed, dominated by a few big models? Is it very open, dominated by many? And the answers to those questions are determinant, I think, about the world we live in and where those opportunities sit. And so until we answer those questions and until we know them and figure out if they are knowable, things like how much of the stack a foundation model dominates, where do the applications sit, we can guess at them, but we don't really know without knowing kind of those two axes. And so I think that's kind of the biggest question on our minds right now.
I really am curious about this rate of change because it's something you hear all the time. People will say AI is moving so fast. How fast is it moving? How would you describe it? I actually would love to start with you, Rebecca, since you brought it up.
Sure. I mean, I think we all can see AI isn't new, and it's not new in the last couple of years, but that the pace has been accelerating and the breakthroughs feel frequent and potentially more and more frequent. So I think it is moving quite quickly. What we don't know, we know there are asymptotes. We know there are barriers we hit today, and we know there are barriers we'll hit in the future. We don't know whether past is indicative of the future and where those asymptotes lie and how hard they are to overcome. And those I actually think are kind of unknowable questions today. So it's been moving very quickly, but we don't know kind of the go forward rate there.
What do you think, Sarah?
The floor is lava, right? I think this is the most fun, most challenging time to be in technology in the last 2 decades of my career. But it's also a really big opportunity for leadership, or if you're an investor, for greed, right? Because the ability to change the dynamics of an industry they're more limited in the middle of a cycle. But when you have the opportunity to just actually change unit economics or change the markets that you serve because of these capabilities, I think people can be much more dynamic with their strategy. And so, the speed of change is very high, and that's very good for us.
What about you, Leigh Marie?
I agree with what's been said. I think one reason why it's so challenging to predict right now is we look at what's happening with the foundation model players, and it does seem like the strategy has shifted a bit. Like at this point, we've seen the massive gains that pre-training these models can have. but it is now becoming economically very challenging to continue just pouring more and more money into that strategy. And so we've seen incredible progress across post-training and then also something called test time compute. Basically giving these models more time to reason, giving them time to explore solutions kind of in parallel and iteratively. And sort of that's kind of how O1, which is OpenAI's latest model, can come up with the answers to some harder questions. So it is really challenging to predict because it's like, okay, this is now a new sort of paradigm. How fast is that going to accelerate? Is it as capital intensive as pre-training was? Like, will this actually democratize more and more people sort of building on top of these large pre-trained models, especially now that there are open source pre-trained models like Llama? So I think it's, as a recovering competitive math kid who's been obsessed with machine learning for the past many years, it's just such an exciting time to make predictions about how all this is going to play out.
I really want to ask more about being a recovering competitive math kid, but that sounds like a different panel. Since you brought up OpenAI, valued at $157 billion right now, one of the biggest questions I get from people who are not in venture capital is how on earth are these valuations going to play out? What kind of exits what can exits really look like? How do you justify some of these valuations? Because to my dad in Florida, they look crazy, right? Who wants to take on the valuation question first?
I'm happy to. Look, we can all paint many scenarios where it's not worth $157 billion, but I think there is one where it might be, right? And that's the world where you have rapid acceleration of these models, right? Where past is precedent, and we keep going and we keep training, and its scale keeps accumulated and compounding on itself, and you have a closed ecosystem. And so you imagine OpenAI as the ultimate Apple App Store of this iteration, where what they can extract isn't 30%, but it's maybe everything, right? They can own the stack and the opportunity to build applications on top of it, get smaller and smaller.
To be clear, when we're talking about everything, what do you mean?
The question is, right, the internet history has always been a balance of protocol and infrastructure layer and application layer. And there's always been eras where protocol and infrastructure owns more and eras where applications own more. And we're kind of in this process of figuring out where we are here. And there's a world where actually we're in a moment where the protocols, which are the models in this kind of analogy, own everything because their ability to do what the applications does is comprehensive. I'm not sure we land there, but we don't know. And in that imaginative scenario, I think it is worth what it is worth today and probably more.
Sarah, you're nodding.
I worked at Goldman Sachs for a brief and inglorious year. And so in that period of time...
Also sounds like another panel.
Love Goldman, actually. Amazing organization, really. I'm more of a tech person. At Goldman, at most investment banks, you learn to do sum of parts valuation, or different scenario analysis, even if you're in venture. I think the first decision point when people think about what OpenAI is worth is okay, well, how good of a business is ChatGPT as a subscription, consumer and prosumer business? And the reported numbers on OpenAI revenue are $3 to $4 billion in run rate now. That's quite a large business. So you could even say it might be worth that pretty soon. But there are questions on how large of a consumer subscription business you can build. I think then people ask, can you build an ads business? Because Google's worth quite a bit more than $157 billion. And if you look at, especially Gen Z and younger, their habits around search or asking questions on the internet are changing. And so I think that's really interesting. OpenAI has made some hires in people who have done ads before. I think the really interesting question about whether or not there's a venture return from there is when you ask, well, what does the organization believe? And the organization believes in AGI, right? And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about this question because I find it very hard to reason about. But
why do you find it hard to reason about?
Well, because I think most people, maybe it's just me. I think most people struggle to picture a world where you're I have, for the cost of compute, the capability of any knowledge worker on demand, right? And how does that restructure industries and what can I do with it? I think the premise of perhaps being a venture investor is not outside of OpenAI or the winning foundation model labs in the case of Takeoff and AGI is not super interesting if you don't believe that the last mile of integration into the economy of these capabilities is pretty hard. And I think for any business leader here, you're like, oh, it is pretty hard. Like, I got to manage all these people. I got to deal with like competing incentives. I got to move an organization. We have all these interfaces. I still have a mainframe over here, right? And so I think the last mile is pretty long, and the like credible but like pretty simple answers for how does AGI make money kind of amount to like we're gonna like let the model trade or something, and I think that's like uninspiring. It might work to capture value, but I think that's kind of the spectrum of how you think about the value.
Well, the thing I like about that is that what you wind up in, which is kind of the moment I believe we're in, is as much a kind of opportunity of imagination as an opportunity of technology. And so, you know, I believe when you think about the value that's going to be created, it's as much of this conversation of where the limitations are and where the speeds are and where the asymptotes are as who can dream it up and who can imagine something that is really hard to get our minds around today and think about how you productize that into fixtures of our lives and our business. And that's the fun part about being an investor. That's very much up our wheelhouse because you're in an imagination crisis, which is, I think, a big moment of opportunity.
Leigh Marie, valuations.
I guess I want to start with a big number, right?
Let's do it.
So I think by some estimation in 2023, I think enterprises already spent $600 million on sort of Gen AI applications. So that's not even the models, that's just like the applications themselves. And that's 8x this year. So it's like not even just a dream. It's literally happening right now. And I mean, I work with this company Codium, they're an AI-powered developer tooling platform. Upwards of 40% of their users' code is generated through Codium. They're like speeding up programmers by literally writing 40% of their code in some cases. So it's clear there's so much value being created today. And then just the rate of growth of these companies like Codium, even with a small team, we are seeing things that blow way past the sort of historical SaaS benchmark of triple, double. We're just seeing like a totally new paradigm with them and some of these other teams. And so then as an investor, you're seeing, wow, this solves real problems today. Enterprises are already eager to adopt it so early on in its life cycle. And then these models are just getting better. So there's just more and more sort of end-to-end capabilities that they're going to be able to do. And so I think all that excitement, especially if you feel conviction around this is the team that's going to capture this vertical specific opportunity, totally justifies a high valuation.
You look like you have a thought, Sarah.
I think Leigh Marie is right. Like it's a general technology, and the way it's going to get delivered is by unbundling it into all of the ways in which it's actually useful to people. Listening to the narrative in AI is very dangerous. I feel like a year and a half ago, the narrative was like, nobody will ever catch OpenAI. Feels more questionable now. And like the application layer has no value. They call them GPT wrappers, right? And there's a version of that, right? If it's just like 3 prompts and an SEO page, like it's not a valuable company. But if you are building with much more understanding of the domain and product, and this is an opportunity for incumbents and for startups, I think there's a lot of value at in every nook and cranny where we can use this really general capability.
That's actually a great segue. As a heads up, I'm going to be coming to you all for questions soon. But first, I'd actually love to talk about use cases. That seems like a good place to go from here. Sarah, I'd like to start with you. What AI use cases are you jazzed about? I know you're really interested in defense right now.
It is true. I think an increasing number of people in the technical community and the investor community are aware of how important AI is, or just innovation and technology is, to national security in this era. And so I just joined the board of a company in this space that we can't talk about yet. I'd say.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure. But
I had to try.
I hope to tell you guys more soon.
I do too.
I'd say broadly, like I think electronic warfare is an increasingly critical part of great power conflict in the future. A huge part of what motivates me as an investor is seeing democratization of capability, giving people the ability to build applications, be it faster or because they can't write code at all, to create videos, to do design, and like the better our tools are, the more democratized those capabilities are. I even, like to Leigh Marie's point, we have companies in our portfolio that have really extraordinary growth rates, companies like Harvey, where like what they want to do is democratize the ability to have high quality legal counsel. And so I think the most inspiring thing to me about working in AI is these algorithms apply to so many different fields, and the demand for these different services, I think, is quite elastic. I think many more people want best in class counsel, or the ability to make amazing videos, or to write applications, or even just write better than people may have imagined, to Rebecca's point about imagination.
Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, I think what AI on the application layer is going to let us do is dramatically change 3 curves, right? Cost, quality, and ease of use. And if you think about where there's opportunity to dramatically change industries from those 3 factors, it gets really, really exciting. Legal is one example. Healthcare is obviously another one. Education is another one. And there are these industries that have been fundamentally structured in a way with blockers, right? Where you have buckets of spend, or tricky things to get around, or difficulty in adoption, where if you change the approach to the market, the ease of adoption, and the quality that can be delivered at low cost to the end user, you can transform the market that you're working with. We think a lot about what it would take to have ubiquitous care at 0 cost. And that has been something that has been effectively impossible to do, that I think is now a challenge of imagination and kind of approach versus fundamental ability. Personalized, perfect learning, no matter where you are, no matter the way you learn. Again, structurally very difficult in a society we set up, has been very difficult to do from a cost curve. Now I think is a product problem and not a capability problem. And when you think of it that way, I think we're going to enter a time of massive transformation of those markets.
Leigh Marie, use cases.
Totally agree with what's been said so far. I mean, you think about, there's hundreds of billions of dollars spent on software, but then there's trillions of dollars spent on services. And you've got all these use cases across industries where, the most valuable companies can afford to hire consultants to go off and maybe do some competitive analysis for them. The vast majority of other companies can't. So I love the sort of idea Sarah said of democratizing access to better intelligence, cost cutting, all of this stuff is going to be possible with these models eventually. And I think there are really excellent opportunities across verticals, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial services, whether it's even in design and manufacturing, using things that we learn from this generation of models and then from the next generation of generative models across the board. I just think a lot of these industries are going to look totally different in the next few years.
One thing that's always fun to think about is what the second order effects of like a change you imagine could mean for the ecosystem or our businesses. And I'll take one because Leigh Marie's been talking about code generation. How many people work at a company here that uses SAP? A reasonable number, most of the world's largest businesses run on SAP, right? Anybody who knows a lot about ERP would say all right, the implementation and change management and upgrade cycle of SAP is really painful, and that limits many things you can do in business. It's an amazing system, right? There's very few replacements. But if you're on a 5-year, 10-year upgrade cycle for SAP, there's a lot of money being put into the consulting and maintenance of that. And I think one thing that we're really excited about, because we think that process, there's a company called Nova AI in this space, we think that process is going to get automated, is it unlocks a lot of budget and a lot of IT capability to go do other things if you're spending less energy and money on just keeping the trains running.
We have a question over here. Please say your name and your company.
Yep, I'm John, the founders of 1440. So at reInvent last week, obviously Bedrock, they announced a data marketplace, I think, for foundational models. They invested a lot of money in Anthropic. They launched Nova. I'm curious your thoughts on Amazon, AWS, and obviously the Anthropic partnership.
What do you think?
So I think Matt Garman did this wonderful podcast with us on No Priors where he.
I wasn't going to say, but I was actually, you've done some work on this, haven't you?
Well, I think we the cloud players and the model players are strategic partners to all of us now, and they've been for a long time, but continue to be. And Matt, in so many words, said no matter what happens, AWS wins, right? And that might be true. I think a lot of customers they have large commitments with Amazon and then want to run models and experiment with them. And Bedrock is a safe place to do so. And that company has been in the business of building data centers for a long time, right? That being said, I think like, and others here are involved in companies in the inference and infrastructure layers, I think it is understated how like backward in time we've gone at the infrastructure level, right? Like there are companies in our portfolio that have a GPU server or a rack in, with sufficient power, like in their office. Like I have young people who work for me who have never seen a server closet. And so I think that the change in hardware capabilities is really dramatic, and that creates opportunities for new players, even in infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we're spending some time on. I think the opportunity below the layer of foundation models in terms of energy efficiency, the energy infrastructure that's going to support this at scale is going to demand a reinvention of where we've been, both really on the hardware and probably the software side of managing it too. And that is a completely horizontal layer that's going to sit below this. And I think you'll see some of these big providers, Amazon, et cetera, play big roles in that, but there will also be room for large new entrants to come in that take a more first principles kind of ground up view that will be a different layer of winners in this world.
Any thoughts, Leigh Marie? I'm just none. You're like, yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I think another thing that I want to underscore is just the importance of, it is, especially from the perspective of these application companies, amazing that you have so many players, including Amazon, that are offering cutting edge models to then use, and that are partnering with these companies to sort of help them get distribution. So, I mean, I think, as Sarah was saying, maybe 2 years ago, people thought it was just going to be OpenAI and Microsoft's kind of like game in town. And no, I have many companies that work with Amazon and Claude through Amazon. And so it's been really incredible seeing sort of the reduction in a platform risk.
I'll add one thing here. I don't know how controversial this view is now, but I think it was controversial a year and a half ago. Like, open source matters in this space. Like, we have companies who use it. I'm sure many of your companies use it, but the open source models are already better than anything that was released last year from the proprietary foundation model labs. And I relate this to the Amazon question, because if you think it is all going to be in the labs, including inference, then like infrastructure in the next generation, those questions matter less. I do not believe that to be true. We are very clear that some of the labs themselves cannot keep up with the inference needs of their customers. And so I think a lot of people are going to want choice and variety, and that's going to end up with new players like Base 10 or Together or whoever it is, and cloud players.
Which is Amazon's refrain, right? Customers want choice. But we have another question over here.
Hey, Stephen Wolf-Pereira, CEO of Alpha. Hey, Rebecca, good to see you. There was a recent episode of Y Combinator where they said vertical AI agents are going to be 10 times bigger than SaaS companies. I'd love to get your take. Do you need to be AI native to win in where we're going? And what does happen to all the SaaS players like the Salesforces of the world?
Look, is it agent time?
Yeah,
Agent time.
I think there's kind of future state, and then there's this question of how long does it take us to get there? Do I believe there's a future state where agents have the capability, consistency, and accessibility to do a lot of those things and are dominant? Totally. I think we don't really know how far away we are from that, and that the last 1%, 2%, 5% of quality and consistency matters a huge amount in transitioning the world for that to be the case. And we may be at 80%, 90%, we're not at 100% there. So I see it as a dominant likelihood of the future, but I think like in any consumer deliverable, the last 5% matters more than anything else, and I think sometimes we're underweighting how far we are from that last 5% to really happen.
And my hot take is that agents don't work. And what I mean by that is if you get on Twitter and you see how the vast majority of people on Twitter define agents, it's these things, they're coming for your job, and they're totally going to replace you today. And I just
right now, yesterday.
Right now, yesterday. You're already late. They already replaced you. And that's just not the case. They do not yet work reliably for the vast majority of use cases. I think there's a really great analogy between agents and self-driving cars, and actually a lot of LLMs and self-driving cars. And I think right now we are kind of in the world where, yes, the car can make a lot of decisions itself, but you still need to be at the wheel. And there are times when you need to intervene. And I think right now, some agent companies, especially verticalized ones, especially in coding and things like that, there are these awesome processes where agents can do most of the work, but you have to intervene a bit to sort of guide it. And then eventually maybe we get to a world of like teleop agents. So the agent does lots of things, and then you'll be occasionally called in. You don't have to like sort of actively monitor it. But I'd say right now we're in that world where, yes, agents can really speed you up, but the human in the loop for basically all of the use cases is vitally important.
Where do you stand on agents, Sarah?
I think agents work. We have instances in our portfolio of agents that do useful things. I would agree with Leigh Marie that the X, the like Twitter version where it's like, I built an agent that replaces you with like 3 prompts, like that's not a thing. Like most jobs are actually quite complicated, and you require a bunch of guardrails and evaluations to figure out how to make something work in a real context. But culminate in incident response and security investigation where we don't have enough talent, like it's really useful for customers. You guys want to try bolt.new. You can write an application in natural language and deploy it to the world, and it will be like a full-fledged application with authentication without a developer. And like that's really exciting. It's only going to get better. Your question was really about like do you need to be native? I think there's like the deepest innovator's dilemma in this area. And so if you take like a core software category like CRM, for example, there's some version of CRM. There's a company called Day AI you can take a look at. It's very S&B oriented today. But there's some version of CRM where like there are no reps that are populating the database with like opportunity updates, right? Like that data exists in the world somewhere. It's in your call records, it's in your visits, it's in your email. And like you should not, as a human, be toiling on database updates. And so if you're Salesforce, do you want to be like, oh, like you don't need any of the business logic we just put 30 years of work into? No, you're like, oh, it'll work with Salesforce somehow.
Right, I mean, I think there's actually an argument that the ease of adoption of this technology fundamentally is much easier, right, than any past transformation. And so that actually creates a world where you need to be adaptable, but you actually don't need to be native, because the ability to integrate it into workflows that already exist should be much easier than we've ever seen before.
So you all have agreed, sort of, to play a game with me. It's going to be a quick word association game. I'm going to say one word, and you're going to say the first thing that pops into your head. Don't even think about it, and we're just going to go. Ready? 2025. Rebecca.
Wild West.
Sarah.
Abundance.
Leigh Marie.
Progress.
AI.
Exciting.
The fund.
Revolutionary.
Value.
Applications.
Elastic.
You stole mine. It's applications.
You can have it too. First thing other than applications, go.
First thing other than applications. Where does the value? Models.
Models.
I mean,
NVIDIA.
NVIDIA. Yeah, there you go.
And that's all the time we have. The answer is NVIDIA. Thank you all so much.